Good evening, everybody. Welcome to yet another Ask Professor Paranormal. Good to see some of my regulars here. Tonight, as always, we'll be talking about whatever you want to talk about, although I have a couple of things to talk about, of course, first. But I do want to encourage you all to come up with either, it doesn't have to be a question. If you just wanted me to talk or riff on some topic, I'm happy to do that as well. First thing I just want to mention, of course, are the upcoming classes for the Rhine Research Center, the Rhine Education Center. And our classes start, actually, my first class starts this Wednesday. I have Wednesday and Thursday classes coming up this week. The one on Wednesday is kind of a little bit restricted in that it's an advanced investigations class. And unless folks have taken the original one or some equivalent, and I can work with people on equivalency, then it's really kind of shut down to, you have to have some prereqs for that. But it's a fun class for me. On Thursday, I'm teaching a course on called People of Parapsychology. And that includes people who have been involved in field work, in the history of parapsychology, the more modern researchers as well. Just some of the folks that I have picked as people I think are important. And actually, this is one of those courses that maybe next time I teach it, I'll have different people to go, some different people together. So that one starts on Thursday. The Thursday night class is actually a 4-week class. And I do want to encourage you, if you have any interest in who's been around in the past, that's a good class to take, because I'll be going deep dive into a few people here and there, kind of focusing on a couple people every week, but otherwise talking briefly about some of the others that are kind of important in our modern and prior history as well. Remember, our field's been around for over 140 years. And then on Monday, this may be of much more interest to folks, I'm teaching an 8-week class starting Monday, next Monday, not tomorrow, but Monday, what is that? The 5th, I believe, of October. Not no, it's actually the 6th, I think. Whatever Monday is, a week from tomorrow. That's a course called Paranormal Case Studies. And that course goes deeply into a number of things. So each week I'll be presenting one or more, and usually it's going to be more than one case. There's a couple of weeks that I'm focusing on a couple of specific cases. There will be cases, many of them are cases I have done because I have kind of deep knowledge, obviously, of those cases myself. And we'll be talking about things that have not been necessarily published or put out or talked about in media over time. So that's one part of it. I'll also be covering some major cases like the Seaford poltergeist case, which happened in 1958, which is kind of like the first real case that was identified as caused by a living person, although there was some stuff before that. So I'll be going deeply into some cases there. The idea being that whether you are interested in the ghost story or interested in doing investigations, there are things to be learned, things to be entertained by. And again, for the cases that I've been closely associated with, students can ask me all sorts of specific questions about those as well. So that starts the first Monday in October. I put the Rhine Education Center link there. Love to see people in the case studies class especially, but also certainly in the people of parapsychology. And then the other thing I want to mention is if you have not been to my website, which is simply www.lloydauerbach.com. Please go there and sign up on my mailing list, because I'm going to start, once I kind of hit a certain number of people, I already have people on the mailing list, but I haven't sent anything out yet. But as soon as I hit kind of like a certain level, a certain number, I'm going to start sending out a specific email on a fairly regular basis to the people on the mailing list. So it won't be necessarily something that is posted anywhere else. So please go there, do sign up for the mailing list. Obviously, for the channel, if you have not subscribed to this channel, please do tell your friends as always. All right. So I see a lot of hellos from folks. And now it's time for you all to ask questions or bring up a topic for something in particular. I don't have anything off the top of my head that I can really, I can pretty much talk about anything if you like, but feel free to just jump right in. And I know it's going to be a little quiet for a moment here as people think about that. So maybe I can talk about, I'll talk about one thing. I think may have talked about it a couple weeks ago. I know I talked about it in some classes, some other interviews, in fact. Just curious, and you can pop up with a thumbs up or something like that. How many of you have heard the term psionics? I just popped that in the, oh, and Jody asked a question. So while you're thinking about the word psionics, the term psionics, any spooky fun plans for Halloween? So every Halloween, some good friends of ours who live in the area have a Halloween party, and it's in not Bay Point, California, and their whole block, actually the whole neighborhood, goes all out for the Halloween. They're like people doing haunted hat, turning their garages and parts of their homes into haunted houses. There's all sorts of great decoration, lots of kids in costumes. And so we go to the party. We sometimes go up and down the street and check out the haunted houses and then just kind of hang out for the kids and so on. So it's kind of fun, but that's my entire plan for Halloween as it happens. Have you ever met anyone who went from total skeptic to believer in the paranormal? I have. Excuse me. Typically, it has to do with having an experience that they simply cannot explain, although they try really hard sometimes. Um, I have met people who, and I know a couple of my colleagues have talked to people who were total disbelievers. They were researchers and other scientists in other areas, and they were talked into looking at some of the research in parapsychology. And they went from being disbelievers to being skeptics, which is a big difference. They still didn't necessarily agree on the interpretation of the evidence, but they confirmed, they were surprised at how well controlled and how well done our experiments are done in parapsychology, which is something we constantly hear. You guys are not doing good research. You don't know how, you're doing bad methodology, all of that. That comes from people who've never looked. So it's just something, it's a problem. Yeah. All right. So let me mention the word psionics before I get to a couple of these other comments here. The word psionics, which is, I talked to somebody, a friend of mine, not too long ago, who said, there are people that are using this term psionics now in the remote viewing world and other areas. So it's such a new term. And I just looked at him point blank, straight face. I said, yeah, it's a new term that's been around probably since at least the 60s, if not the 50s. So psionics definition, which comes from science fiction, by the way, is the study and application of psi, or psychic phenomena, psychic abilities. That's what psionics means, study and application. So in actuality, anyone doing applied psi, anyone doing, any sort of psychic work is doing psionics in that respect. Parapsychologists are doing psionics, you're doing certainly studying psi. It's a good term. And I know back in the 80s, several of us tried to push that term as an alternative to parapsychology, partly because it sounds more like, recommend it. It brings up the idea of bionics. It sounds more scientific, which is why I think people are using it again, trying to use it now. But it's hardly a new term. In fact, if you go back through many, many issues of the TV Guide over the years, when they talked about a show that had science fiction tinge to something with psychic ability, they use the term psionics. So if the TV Guide uses it, it's in pop culture. All right. Tina in New York, you're looking at the New York Comic Con panel schedule now. Halloween plans need to wait. Yeah. Love Halloween, love the time. I am doing a ghost stories thing for a group at a law firm. So that's kind of a thing I like to play with. Let's see. Kathy, your friend owns Catfight Coffee in New Jersey, plays the band The Misfits. Amiable Annabelle doll there last night. The Annabelle doll, yeah, the doll has a bad rep. The doll's a doll, but it's got, with the Annabelle, if it's the real Annabelle doll, people talk about that doll having been cursed. If anything, it's all of people's attitudes and emotions towards that doll that has done something to it. But it's not, objects may hold information that is negative, and you may pick that up. but it's us. We make the decisions. We do that. Did someone say Halloween special on this channel? Well, I'll be back on the 26th. Have to think about a Halloween focus for that one. I'm on the 31st again. I'm going to be busy at my friend's party. Let's see. When the Learning Channel, Summer Recall says, when the Learning Channel did the Smile and Al investigation, a professor who was an anatomist, University of Washington, total skeptic, had an experience that completely turned him around. That's great. That's great. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. The Smiling Owl investigation. I haven't heard of that one. But it's very often it is personal experience that'll cause someone to question. Michael Shermer, who is the publisher and editor of Skeptic magazine, a little bit more, he's still a disbeliever in many respects, but more open-minded. When the times I've talked to him, much more willing to talk. And he had a mystical experience. He's had a couple of experiences, and it's made him question just the validity of the impossibility of these things. That's all I know about him. I don't think he's converted. And we don't necessarily want somebody to convert to a believer. We do want someone who is a disbeliever to start looking at the question. That's a true skeptic. What's the question there for that? So that's what we really want. I mean, I've had people come to me who said that they always believed this stuff was impossible, that it wasn't real, and yet I had this experience. Can you tell me what this experience might mean? And I can point them to other things, give them an idea, and so on. Okay, what do you think of the Enfield poltergeist and the investigation? Well, I did speak many years ago to Maurice Grosse and didn't really connect with. I got connected with Guy Lyon Playfair a few times, but never really talking about the Enfield case. I think it's very controversial, but definitely, according to Maurice, there was some real phenomena going on. The question is often how much of the case is truly psychokinetic, paranormal, and that kind of thing. And unless you spend a lot of time really teasing every little element apart, which I don't know that they did at that time, it's hard to know what percentage of the case might have really been real phenomena. But based on what I've heard or read from Guy Lyon Playfair and from Maurice Grosse, I'd say that there was real phenomena going on. Again, might not all have been real phenomena. Jody Music, free Annabelle. Yeah, I'd say that. Yeah, but what's the doll going to do if she gets freed at that point? Some recall in production booth, someone looked in a window 12 feet off the floor. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Oh, Jude Press produced that. Really? All right, I'm gonna have to, because Jude drops in every once in a while. Jude Press is a producer director I worked with as he was getting his start back in the early 90s. He and David Abbott, who he was working with at the time, came to me, just kind of give you a little background. This is an interesting thing. Jude has produced a lot of really cool things, but they came to me wanting to do a TV pilot for a show that effectively was a ghost hunting team kind of show. And the show was called Haunted America. He had an actor who was going to be the host of the show, a friend of his. And the problem was trying to come up with the money for that. And what ended up happening was, timing-wise, it worked out perfectly, because I was working with Japanese television, and they wanted to do a show with their Japanese medium, Aiko Gibo, where Mrs. Gibo was going to be in an American paranormal TV show. And at the time, I was working on sightings from time to time. And I really wanted to do sightings, is what they wanted. Unfortunately, we could not adjust the dates with the Japanese folks. This was a problem with them sometimes. And they gave dates that they said were unmovable. And it's like, they really were movable. But I said, it was a time in July, when no American TV shows were doing anything but being on hiatus. So there was nothing going on production-wise. So instead, I had the Japanese folks fly Jude, his producer, and David Abbott. We had a case in Florida. We worked with some guys from the University of Florida. They had done this case originally. We had another case in Florida near Cocoa Beach, in a place called Ashley's Pub. Worked with my friend Martin Caden at the time, got him involved as well, and we shot this pilot called Haunted America, and we almost had it sold. Um, we actually sold it to somebody wanted to buy it at the time that there were folks doing syndication instead of, the streaming channels weren't existing at that time, it was cable. And there was a company that wanted to buy the show, but the problem ended up being that they wanted to buy 65 episodes. They wanted us to do 65 episodes, which was great. I mean, it was going to be a huge budget for that. Biggest part of the budget was going to be travel, but they wanted us to have the first 5 in the can within 3 weeks. And that was physically impossible. And they wouldn't wait. So we lost out on that deal. It would have been an insane kind of shooting schedule, but it would have been great. We have the pilot. Jude and I have occasionally talked about editing in some of the cutout footage. Love to see that happen. And hopefully I can get him going in this project again, because he's got all the original footage. In fact, we did some more shooting in another place back in 1999 to expand on it, and just never did anything with it because Jude has gotten busy with a number of other projects. So I'd like to see Haunted America happen again. It just is a really cool thing. I think next time, what I may do is ask Jude for permission to show part of it, because I do have to have permission from him to show it on this, since it's going to go out on YouTube. But well, we'll see what we can do. Okay, let's see. Found a medium. Yeah, let's see. Mary Prankster, do you think society's collective unconscious can generate greater paranormal activity? Something like what happens in Ghostbusters 2. You know, that's a really good question. There is something to be said for the idea that the collective unconscious does influence world events to some extent, and a lot of that you can see in the data from the Global Consciousness Project, which has been going on since the 1990s, looking at data of 50 plus remote random event generators around the world, and comparing the data of non-randomness that happens every once in a while against world events. And if you look at the data, if you just simply Google Global Consciousness Project, you can actually look at the data yourself and some of the interpretations. Some of the data shows that before certain emotional events in the world, that there's a perturbation of that data, almost as if it's predictive that something's about to happen. So it's worth looking at that. Now, on the other hand, I don't think that collective unconscious is going to affect slime and in the New York subway or otherwise. So, but let's hope a big wave of change is coming in a positive direction. We certainly need a wave of change here in the U.S. And Susan, oh, that's some recall Susanna. Okay, that's why you knew Jude. That's right. I remember that. Okay, Kathy, you went to a chocolate farm in Goshen, Connecticut called Tomcrest. They use cow's milk. You can tour so I assume it was not a farm where they're growing cacao, but a farm where they're also making chocolate, which is great. That's a good thing, because a cacao farm or plantation would have to be, Connecticut's not the right temperature, temperate zone for that. It's too cold in the winter. So graveyard grog, yeah. Of course, I've never been slimed by a ghost. I'll just say that. That's my usual standard answer to the question that comes up once in a while. Anyway, when I hear from people on the ghost hunting shows that this is a relatively new thing, I've mentioned this before in these podcasts. It always just bothers me so much that there are people who go on TV or at their events, they say, everything started with Jason and Grant and ghost hunters in the 2000s, and they forget or completely ignore, and especially when those people are then saying that that things got started not too long before them, Haunted America would not have been the first show. It probably would have been the first actually regular show focused on investigations. That was 1993 and 4. So that's quite a ways away. But there were segments on sightings, there were segments on unsolved mysteries, there have been segments on TV news. I mean, I did ghost hunting segments usually in October because it was for Halloween on news programs, on shows like Evening Magazine and shows like that, and even for some of the local talk shows, as had my colleagues back as far as the early 80s, and I know people who were on shows in the 70s, and there were segments on with ghost hunting individuals or groups back much before that, and of course it's been going on a lot longer than that. There was even a guy, and I'm not going to mention him by name, but there was a guy who sued over a movie company and a TV company, claiming that he had come up with the idea for a ghost hunting TV show or for a movie about a ghost hunting team and working with a psychic or a ghost hunting team and so on. When that's it's an absurdity. It's different. The pitch might have been legit, but it's claiming that they originated that idea, the idea of a parapsychologist, and one of his claims was a parapsychologist and a psychic working together on a TV show, or just in general. They were the first ones to ever do that, except that that's not true. And historically, that's absolutely not true. So um, there's a history here that is very rich. That's one of the reasons why I'm teaching this People of Parapsychology class, is because so many people are just simply unaware of the history. Paul, no, I haven't read that book yet. I have the book in my Kindle, but I haven't had a chance. I have so many books that I've got to read or want to read beforehand. So it's there. It's just with everything I'm doing, I don't have enough time to sit down and read like I used to. When I used to commute back and forth into San Francisco, I read a lot more because I could read on the BART trains back and forth, but not as much anymore. Susanna Summer Recall. Remember, you had tons of interviews around. Yeah, actually, I have to tell you all that the streaming stuff and the podcast world, what's developed on the internet over the last 15, 20 years has actually cut down on the media interviews that I used to do around Halloween. I do them throughout the year now. It used to be, there's so much paranormal stuff because of the paranormal TV shows on streaming, on YouTube and on other things, so many podcasts, that it's no longer a big deal for TV stations, news stations, radio stations to do something special for Halloween. It's spooky all year round, actually. Some of them might still do some focus at Halloween, but it varies quite a bit. And back in the 80s, into the 90s, even into the early 2000s, I would do dozens of interviews, TV, mostly radio. The last 2 weeks of Halloween, of October, and definitely on Halloween. In fact, there were several times in the late 80s, early 90s. There was one day in particular, I remember, I think it was 1989, where I was on the phone with radio stations and this is when I was willing to do that early in the morning, from 5 a.m. Pacific time till midnight Pacific time, with a 1 hour break for lunch, a 1 hour break for dinner, and a half-hour break for breakfast. And most of the interviews ran exactly the same way, but they were in different markets, so that didn't make any difference. And of course, they never ended up online at that point. For Ghostbusters, when that came out, I did 250 interviews the month of October 1984, radio and print. There were some print reporters as well. My colleagues in the faculty at the parapsychology faculty from JFK University did dozens as well, because I couldn't do them all. So there's been a lot of this over the years. And Susanna contacted me because she saw me in sightings. That's right. Yeah. I just didn't remember that up top without context. Have you ever followed up on older cases from the Unsolved Mysteries days? Well, I mean, one of the cases which I wasn't involved in directly, was the Moss Beach Distillery, and I've worked with them. I haven't done much there since the pandemic, but I did a lot of stuff there over the years, although I was not in the segment that they did. Um, the segment that I was really involved in was House on 37th Street in Vancouver, Washington. I did follow up with them, and they had activity going on for quite a while. In fact, the couple ended up on an episode of Larry King Live that I was on a few years later as well. So that's about the only one. I'm trying to remember what else I did for Unsolved Mysteries. There was one other segment I did. I did do a segment that I got cut out of completely, which was in Wisconsin back in the 80s. And it was a horrible experience because the director wanted to make the case all about demons. And even the people living there who went through the experience didn't believe it was demons, but that's what he wanted. And since I would not say on camera what he wanted me to say, I got cut out. And there were some other really crappy things that went on around that director as well. In fact, he ended up getting fired from Unsolved Mysteries a while back, much later, or not too much later. But it was really a terrible experience for that. At least they paid me. All right. Any new interviews coming up? Yes. Not online yet, but I did one that will be just the best thing to do is to watch the media page on my website on lloydauerbach.com, because as I get the links, as they're putting up these interviews, I will add the links. They're going to be at the top of the list. So the most recent first. And I did one on Thursday for a show out of the UK. I'll be doing another one of her shows. It's Teresa Chung, who has a show. That'll be going up, I think, on the 31st. And then I'll be recording something for another one of her shows, which will go on at some point down the road. I'll do that in early November. I've got, I'm doing an interview on Tuesday night for a show, guys actually in Australia, I believe. And then and once that's up, I'll put that on. There'll be a lengthy interview, and I've got a couple more requests I'm just scheduling right now. So I have a few more coming for sure. But they'll come in again. I wish they would reboot Sightings. I wish somebody would do Sightings as it was intended, which is kind of like In Search Of. I wish there were producers who could get away with doing things the right way, like the original producers of Sightings. I wish they would just release all the Sightings episodes on DVD or on one of the streaming channels. I mean, I'd just like to see all that go out there again. Of course, my appearances on Sightings are all up on my YouTube channel, which is just youtube.com/Lloyd Auerbach. I had, for about a day, I did have up the Unsolved Mysteries segment, but I had to take it down. Cosgrove Muir was watching what people were putting up. As it happens, they did a sweep just like they happened to do a sweep the day after I put it up. So I had to take that down. So can't put everything up, unfortunately. But it's out there. You can find things on YouTube any other way as well. Susanna, when did you get involved with the Hornet? So the Hornet story goes back to 1998, late 1998, early 1999 is when I first heard about the Hornet. I wasn't not even aware it was opening as a museum here in the Bay Area, but I originally got a call from a psychic named Stosh Margaret Murray, who had a poltergeist case. Now, she didn't mention the Hornet at all at that point. She had a poltergeist case. And we had a long discussion about this because she recognized that it was actually a living person living in the house. And she wanted to know how to deal with that and how to work with the people and all that. So she was asking really good questions. And she had a great background in science. I mean, she was a psychic and a medium, but she actually spent 20 years working for Genentech, the genetics company, in data analysis. So she had a really good background in science. So we talked at length, and then I invited her to come along to the Moss Beach Distillery when Jude Prest and I were going to shoot some footage at the distillery, the owner let me bring in a bunch of people. I had 3 psychics with me. I had a physicist friend from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories who was there. I had a bunch of folks spread out around the place, and we were given carte blanche to the place for 2 nights. And Stash was there, and she watched what was going on, explained that. And after we finished, she called me the next day after we finished all this and said, "Okay, I got to tell you about this great case that I've been working on." And it was the USS Hornet. And she was originally called in by one of the folks who worked there who was having experiences and told her about, originally told her about other people seeing apparitions around the place. But she had an experience specifically in the brig area with some very negative energy that was there. And negative in the sense it was very depressed, not angry, but depressed. So she thought she saw a figure there. So she brought Stash in. Stash picked up on the fact that, which was not written up at that point, that one of the captured kamikaze pilots, so it was somebody they shot down and captured during World War II on the Hornet, committed seppuku or harakiri, so suicide, in the brig because he was gonna kill himself by crashing into the ship, but the ship shot him down. The ship was never hit by direct enemy fire in any way, shape, or form. So they ended up she consulted some, I believe, Shinto priests and did a ritual that would kind of release this one individual to go on because he was just simply stuck there. And then Stash started doing interviews with people who were working aboard the ship and brought me in. So it was 1999 when I went over and started talking to folks. And then we ended up doing a lot of interviews that we put on video. In fact, we worked out a situation where we created a sort of it was going to be the first part of a multi-part documentary series on the haunting of the USS Hornet. And the Hornet sold it for quite a while, but we ran into a blockage on somebody on the board who had influence who didn't want the paranormal story getting out at that time. And we were never able to, and then other things happened down the line that we were never able to do part 2 and part 3, which was unfortunate. But I have a lot of footage. In fact, if you take my paranormal case studies class, you will see footage of interviews with people that has not been released to the public at all. The early witnesses is one of the specific classes it dives deep into the USS Hornet case. So, all right, Paul, you liked Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. He also did a show called World of Strange Powers. In fact, I picked up a collection, Arthur C. Clarke collection, pretty cheaply on DVD that has both shows. And he put out a book called, I think it was called remember, I don't have it in front of me. It's either World of Strange Powers or Mysterious World. I think it's World of Strange Powers. Really good book on the subject, in fact, on psychic phenomena. Clarke was a skeptic, but a good kind of skeptic. And he asked good questions on that show. So that was a really good show. And in fact, I have to, not that it's a perfect book, but I did discover in a used bookstore a copy of a book on mind over matter. I'll tell you about it in a second, but interestingly enough, it is available. It's published by an academic publisher these days. I got a different edition, but the Kindle versions is affordable. In fact, I think the whole thing, even the hardcover is relatively affordable. Yeah. So this is you won't see this cover on Amazon, but the book is on Amazon, and it's called Mind Over Matter. It's by a guy named Kit Pedler. Now, anybody out there know that name from a particular longest running science fiction show by any chance? Kit Pedler was a scientist, or is I don't know if he's still alive, is a scientist for sure. Wrote science fiction and other things, but also he wrote a bunch of episodes in the 1960s of Doctor Who. So when I saw this book, I had no idea he'd written a book on mind over matter. It's actually a pretty good book on psychic phenomena in general, not just psychokinesis. And it is on Amazon. And Pedler, when I saw the book, because of his Doctor Who association, I immediately picked it up with that, and I bought it without even really looking closely at it. But the other thing about Kit Pedler, I'll just mention, this is kind of a little anecdote for me. In high school, I took an advanced chemistry class. It was like in the AP chemistry class thing. We had a great chemistry teacher um, who was a little bit of a mad scientist, actually. So we had some mad science stuff going on. And there was a section on organic chemistry, which everybody knows is a really tough thing unless you're really into it. And I was having a hard time studying it. Now, as it happens, I had gotten a book from the Science Fiction Book Club, which I don't even know if that exists anymore, called Mutant 59, The Plastic Eaters. And the theme of the book was about these scientists who had come up with this bacteria that ate plastic because they were having problems with too much plastic in the world. Sound familiar? And the bacteria mutated and got out. All right. And in the book, which was, I can't recall who the other author was. I think one of the other author was also a scientist who wrote for Doctor Who, but Kit Pedler was one of the authors of this. In the book, they had a part of the plot was one of the characters explaining organic chemistry and the chemistry of plastics and all that stuff to other characters. So instead of studying, I read that novel. I sat down and read it like the day before. I got an A. I aced the test. And when the chemistry teacher asked me about that, because he didn't expect anybody to do that, I told him, and he ended up reading that book himself, or at least told me he did. And he's like, I gotta refer this. This should be the reading for everybody for organic chemistry. So I haven't reread it. I have to look and see if it's still out there. But it was called Mutant 59, The Plastic Eaters, and pretty cool book. So Kit Pedler, many science fiction writers have a background in science. And in fact, I will mention something really interesting I learned working at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and talking to certain science fiction writers over the years. Oh, interesting. Science Fiction Club refer to the original. Hey, it's still operating. That's kind of cool. I may have to look into that. So one of the things I learned over the years is, and I knew, in fact, that there were a number of people who wrote science fiction books under their own name who were also scientists in various fields, physicists, biologists, people like that. People who also just like to write fiction too. That's not an uncommon thing. But one of the things I talked to somebody at the lab when I was working there in the library, he told me that one of the things he's noticed over the years, and I've talked to other scientists like this, if you're in physics, let's say, and you come up with a really outlandish idea, something that seems contradictory or is just something that the other physicists are going to go, yeah, that's not true. That can't possibly be real, that kind of thing. He said one way to get people, because he said at that point, they won't even talk to you about it. So he said one way that he learned to get his colleagues to talk about theoretical ideas that are outlandish or kind of out of the box was to write science fiction novels or write science fiction stories. And so he'd write a book. In one case, he wrote a book, and I can't recall off the top of my head what it was. It had this theory in it. He wrote extensively about the theory in the novel under a pen name. And none of his colleagues knew he was that guy who wrote those science fiction books. Oh, that's too bad that they closed on my birthday this year. Anyway, this researcher said he wrote under a pen name. Nobody knew he was that guy. He waited till the book was out for about a month. And then he went in with a copy of the book. He said, I just read this really interesting science fiction novel. It's a lot of fun to read. It's got this really weird theory. I'd be curious what you think of the book. And so many of his colleagues were science fiction nuts. So they read the book, and then they start discussing the theory that's in the book because it was science fiction, not attempted to be real. But they could have real discussions now about an supposedly outlandish theory. And science fiction's always done that. And Brian, thanks for saying you've heard of psionics. As I recall, it might have been Jeff Mishlove who was really a proponent of getting that term also in the 80s. I know we had conversations about it way back when. There are some others of my other people I know, and again, if you read science fiction, you'll find it in a lot of places. It's a shame that people who are not familiar with pop culture are trying to promote that as a new term. That reminds me of the Ghost Hunters saying that there's no history here. So it's just if you happen to run into people in any of the psychic worlds with remote viewing or something else, and they start touting psionics as something brand new, just remind them that the TV Guide has used that term for decades, as have science fiction writers. Is what is old is often new again, as we know. One term I'd love to bring back, which was used heavily in the 60s, excuse me, early 60s, but mainly in the 50s in science fiction, kind of the post-golden age of science fiction. In referring to psychics, people with ESP, they were often called espers, capital ESP, ER. And that term has showed up in science fiction and comic books from time to time. In fact, if any of you are Star Trek nerds like me, you might know that in the second pilot for Star Trek, the episode where no man has gone before, the first episode that was shot with William Shatner, one of the characters, Sally Kellerman, was playing a psychiatrist who was on the ship, became a character in the episode, kind of gaining superpowers. It was talked about her Esper rating, and you'll hear that term in old science fiction shows and movies, and especially in comic books and things. It's a cleaner term, I think, than psychic, which has a lot of different baggage to it. And it just means somebody with ESP who's using ESP. So kind of cool. Tina, and yeah, and Gen Alpha invented the wheel. That's right. Yeah, of course. Have you seen Reality Check with Ross Coulthart? No, I have not. Psionics, UAPs, remote viewing. Yeah, I think people in the UAP world have discovered the term psionics also. I know it's been people in the remote viewing world. It's always surprising to me that they are not aware of science fiction. It's not one thing not to be aware of comic books, but there's so much science fiction that covers our subject in general. Let's see. Have you ever heard of any people that work with some of the souls of the Challenger disaster? I have not, Brian. Yeah, I've not heard of anybody doing that. I did vaguely hear about somebody who was some medium who back in the 80s, or channeler, who connected with them, but I haven't really heard much about that. Paranormal Monkey, what are the theories surrounding how poltergeists are able to generate energy needed to throw at objects? Well, first, we're not sure it's energy. So there hasn't been any energy detected around psychokinesis. We're not sure what's going on with that. In fact, in attempting to, this is not for poltergeist phenomena, by definition, whether you're talking about a living person or a dead person moving something with their mind, with their consciousness, that's psychokinesis. In experiments with people who can do PK at least once in a while, sometimes what's been detected has been electrostatic fields, and the human body can generate a pretty powerful electrostatic field enough to potentially move something. In fact, if you've ever seen footage or heard of a Russian psychic from the 60s named Nina Kulagina, also known as Nelia Mikhailova, if you ever watch any old black and white footage of a psychic moving things, she's got her hands around matchboxes and things like that. Apparently, the Russians found out in doing research that when she did her thing, she was sweating a lot. And they did an analysis of her sweat, and she had an increased level of histamines. The stuff we take antihistamines to prevent in our bloodstream for allergies. And histamines do react to electrostatic fields. And she would pick up the object first and put it down. And so some of her histamines, you might say, got on the objects, and then they measured a high electrostatic field coming off of her hands that moved these non-metallic objects and other things. So we can generate, not consciously, but we can generate fields that could conceivably move things. My friend Ed May, who was in charge of the Stargate program and is a physicist as well as a parapsychologist, ran into a paper that he's been trying to dig up. He read the paper. He unfortunately, he was moving at the time. He wasn't able to find the paper. He's still looking for it, where a physicist speculated that it wouldn't take much for consciousness to use Brownian motion. Think of it as a form of a molecular, starting at a molecular level, a form of billiards, where you hit one molecule that hits a bunch of other molecules that hits more and more and more to cause something to physically move. So in other words, it wouldn't take much energy at all, if any energy, to cause our minds to affect something like that. There are other theories about that, including warping space and time, but we just don't have, I'm not quite sure what the slow charge dynamo theory, unless you're talking about it being electrostatic, but it always, in the cases we label in the US as poltergeist cases, we find living agents who, removed from the situation, activity is not happening. Placed in the situation under certain conditions, usually it's emotional or sometimes neurological, that's when things happen. But it has to be certain conditions around them. Sometimes it's something triggering it for them, like stress caused by their family or something else. So we're not sure exactly what's causing the PK in terms of the actual motive force, if there is even force involved, if it's something else. People say, well, how do you know it's not ghosts? Well, number one, nobody sees an apparition except in the rarest cases where there's something, the apparition is not connected to the phenomena. Nobody experiences an apparition, including mediums and psychics brought into those cases, by the way. So I've had several poltergeist cases with physical phenomena, sometimes witnessed, a couple that I can think of that I witnessed phenomena, where the medium psychics that was in there, and I sometimes brought in more than one, could pick up on the living people, but there wasn't anybody around to cause these things. That's the big piece right there. That's the most important thing. We can't even say there was a ghost there. The only other thing you could say, you could just simply say, hey, there are this team of ghosts that are running around causing people, parapsychologists think it's really the living people. So it's really difficult in that way. Let's see here. Graveyard Grog, term Esper is used for magical intelligent creatures in Final Fantasy. It's been used in Dungeons and Dragons. It's been used in other things as well. When the coins light up in the closed change drawer, that's in the Banta Inn, if that's what you're referring to. That's a restaurant bar out in Tracy, California, which had an active apparition that could actually do PK. It's pretty rare for ghosts to do that, but we have cases where the physical phenomena connects to the apparition that's being seen by a lot of people, and we actually identify who that is. And one of the things that the guy did when he was alive, he was the bartender, manager, owner, and behind the bar, his old cash register, he'd keep the drawer open, and he would keep his hands in the till, and he'd like to place the coins in nice, neat rows. So when I was doing investigations, it was it was more than, I say it was probably almost 20 years after he died. A lot of physical activity going on in the 80s. They had a brand new cash register. We tested this. We screwed up the coins, closed the register as a new electronic one, waited a couple of minutes, opened it up, and the coins in a nice, neat row. And as Susanna Summer Recall says, no sound. That was pretty interesting. Why do there seem to be more instances of child ghosts? Because they're higher in stuff. I've not heard that more instances today, or just generally, because generally I've not heard that. I'm not seeing any evidence of that. There could be more reporting of that. One of the problems with apparitions with ghosts in general is the same problem with UFOs that went on, UAPs that went on for decades. It's what J. Allen Hynek, who was the guy for UFOs back in the 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, actually. And Hynek also often talked about a reporting artifact, which basically says, means that there are, and we know that there are likely significantly more experiences people have than are being reported or recorded. In the UFO instance, people were afraid to report it, especially people who were pilots or in places of authority. They didn't want to report that. With ghostly things, I've had the experience many over the years of being at a college giving a lecture, being at a conference or with business people and other folks, and seeing people or hearing people with their colleagues, work colleagues or friends, completely dismiss any claims of anything paranormal or even the research. And then later on pulling me aside and saying, hey, let me tell you about the ghost that I saw, or let me tell you about my psychic dream. And they had just said they don't believe in it or that it's impossible. So there is that reporting artifact. And in different cultures, certain things get reported more than others. So in a culture that believes one thing is possible, let's say telepathy between people at long distance, they may have other kinds of psychic experiences, paranormal experiences, but because they're taboo to talk about, they may never report them. So we don't know what the incidence is there in that case. And the centuries ago, there are actually very few reports of apparitions hanging around for centuries, like significantly few. And they tend to be in some of those old places that may actually be haunting, residual hauntings and not actual apparitions. Let's see, Paul, season 5 of the TV show Ghosts comes on next month. That is correct. That is coming up real soon as well. I just started watching a cartoon, an animated show on Netflix called Haunted Hotel. And I loved the first episode. It was a lot of fun. So I think all the episodes are there. It's worth watching. It's goofy. It's funny. It's a lot of fun. Okay, let's see here. Brian, with some of the folks from the PRG, that's the Parapsychology Research Group, and I think some folks from Stanford Research Institute. Yeah, I'll have to ask Ed May about that. I will ask Ed May. All right. Oh, you had your own experiences, Susanna. That's great. Tony was the bartender. Tony Gukin was the bartender at the Banta Inn. Again, Banta is that's one of the cases I go deeply into for the paranormal case studies course that's starting on a week from tomorrow, a week from Monday, first Monday in October through the Ryan Education Center. So do take a look at what our courses are and think about taking it. You can also you don't have to take it for a grade. You can just audit it for fun. And you'll have access to everything, by the way, for many, many months after the class. Let's see. Have you ever spoken with Keith Linder? He claims items from his poltergeist case have changed on the molecular level. I only connected with him briefly well before, I think he even moved since the time that I connected with him. And I had someone up in Seattle do an investigation with him, and that person was not impressed. That's all I'll say. If objects in a poltergeist case, first of all, he would not, by our definition of what a poltergeist is, Keith Linder shouldn't be using that term. Because from what I understand, he believes it's an entity, not him. If he's causing it or some living person is causing it, that makes it a poltergeist case, the way we define things in the US. If not, then it's something different. It would be an apparition or an entity using PK. And whether things change on a molecular level, that's entirely possible. When we talk about spoon bending, bending spoons and things like that. Where is my spoon? Oh, there it is. Okay. And I've run spoon bending parties. So here's a spoon that the bowl of the spoon was pulled over, which if you ever try to do that yourself, and by the way, this was one I bent at a spoon bending thing back in the early 80s with a guy who originated it, an aerospace engineer named Jack Houck. And Jack was running these things. I actually, at one point, JFK University had video, but we had a flood and all the video of so many things, including lectures, was destroyed. But I basically reached out. You could actually see me reaching over and just pull it down just like that. One of the things Jack did was brought in a metallurgist to do slices of metal of the spoons that that seemed like they bent very easily or bent unusually or flopped over, and the spoons that looked like people were physically using force, and then they also did various kinds of physical force to bend other similar spoons. And he compared the metal structure, the crystalline structure of the metal, under a microscope, which you can do. It's not molecular, but it's still under a microscope. And if you look at, for example, the structure of steel, it's very crystalline, and you can see regular straight lines and connections there. But what the things that seem to be affected by psychokinesis, the boundaries between the crystals of the metal were melted together. And there was absolutely not enough heat to do that. Certainly not enough when I did this. So something on a molecular level is entirely possible. People have, and in fact, Olga Warrell, who was a famous psychic healer, in research with Dolores Krieger, one of the things they had her do was affect a flask of enzymes to see if she could speed up or slow down the enzymatic reaction, and she was able to speed it up without touching the flask, and then to affect blood hemoglobin content in a blood sample. And the closest they got to duplicating either of those was to put a huge, intense magnetic field on the samples, which she did not generate. They couldn't detect that coming from her hands. So similar to, PK does things similar to other things, but different for that. Okay. So the Haunted Hotel series on Netflix is already loaded. It's already there on Netflix. I just started watching it. I think it actually went up on Friday, this past weekend. Let's see what else we got. Okay. Anyway, so one of these days I will, for those of you, if anybody's here in the Bay Area, I'm really hoping to get doing the spoon bending parties again. People have asked me if I could do them virtually, and the answer is no, they don't work virtually. I've tried. There's a group dynamic that is incredibly important in doing it. The only way we could do it virtually is if we had a group in one place on Zoom with a group in another place and somebody in that other place who could actually help facilitate. That could be done. We could do that in multiple places. And Tina, you missed Kreskin passed away a little while ago. He was very cool. You can find many of his shows actually up on YouTube. And he actually had Jalen Hynek on one episode back in, it would have been 1977. Excuse me, 1973. And I know that because I was a junior in high school. I had just visited Northwestern the day before, and I'd just flown back from Chicago with my dad that day, and turned on Kreskin, which I was watching The Amazing World of Kreskin that night. And Jalen Hynek, who I had met the day before, was the actual guest. So that kind of led me to choosing Northwestern for sure as my go-to. All right, so just want to close up here. Thanks for coming, everybody. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell your friends. Remind you that the shows are there going back over a year. So in the live tab on the channel, you can find older shows. Go to my website, lloydauerbach.com. Remember to spell my first name out with one L, as you see on the screen, and jump on the mailing list. If you want to get something from me in the next couple weeks, I'll start sending something out probably maybe a week before Halloween. That's when I'm planning on putting something out. So please do that. And join me in 2 weeks, October 26th. Yes, I'll try to make this more Halloween-y for the next show. We can talk a bit about the history of Halloween and other spooky things. Not that the rest of the year is not spooky, but it's getting spooky all over the world right now, isn't it? Thank you, everybody, for coming. And I hope you have a great couple of weeks. Take care, and may the force be with you. Good night.